Hello, I'm Adrian Marcu. I'm chairman of the GSA board, and on behalf of the board, I want to welcome everybody to our annual meeting. Every year we do this with big pride, as we have our yearly opportunity to review our successes and the impact that GSA continues to make in our industry. And this year it's particularly special for all of us because earlier in the year GSA marked its 15th anniversary, and I will invite all of you to give a big hand for 15 years of hard work and continued successes. We have here Lyle Bell, our previous chairman, which give him a big hand too, which he was part of those 15 years. Let's salute him. Again, I won't steal the thunder from what's coming in the presentations that you're going to see, but you'll see that GSA continues to adapt to the growth of the industry, continues to grow its reach, and further reaching it in both technology and also geographically. You'll see that GSA, as it did in the past 15 years, continues to evolve and present more features and more functionality to the industry. If you look at what we did in the past 15 years, we started from a one-wire connection, we went to the network, and then we're looking at internet right now, and that is very exciting. Anyway, with that said, I'll invite here to the podium the fuel of behind the energy of GSA for the 15th time. Is it 15th time? The president of GSA, Peter Durant.
Okay. Good afternoon. I would say good morning. Normally we do this every morning. This year we do it this afternoon. Very happy to be here and talk about what GSA has achieved and what we are going or what we're planning for 2014. First of all, I'd like to thank every Platinum member, as I always do, and all the members of GSA, because without the membership support, this organization would simply not exist. So for all the members in this room, thank you very much. I'd like to also thank the board of directors. These people have the responsibility to take care and look after the membership and the organization and deal with strategic planning issues. Some of them are quite challenging, and I'd like to thank the board very much. You can see the names on the screen, and you've got it in your handout. The ones in bold, those are the people on the executive committee, which is a smaller work group within the board. Now I'd like to ask Mark Pace. Mark, if you can maybe run through the finances of the organization.
Thank you, Peter. Rather than bore you with a bunch of numbers, I thought I'd put some pretty pictures up there and really talk a little bit about the great job that Peter and Michelle and the rest of the organization has done over the past 10 years in terms of looking after the financials. As Peter said, GSA is funded through membership, and the membership dues allow us to do all the work that Peter and the rest of the organization gets done, in addition to all of the volunteers that make up the committees. So what I've got here is a slide that shows us a 10-year review of how well we did in projecting revenues against actuals. You can see the budget was in ebb, and the revenue actuals are shown in green. It's difficult to absolutely forecast revenue because memberships, ebb and flow over time. But as you can see here, we've done a pretty good job of getting close to predicting what the revenues were going to be, and therefore what GSA could undertake. And then you can see that it was a big spike there in 2008 when we had an influx of membership that since then has slightly abated. The next slide shows the expenses side, and this is again where I think that Peter and the rest of the GSA staff has done a wonderful job. You can see the budgeted expenses in red and the actual in blue, and you can see that in almost every case they have managed their expenses such that we've brought a little bit more money to the bottom line and retained earnings that we were able to then carry over into the following year. Speaking of which, there's the retained earnings. Again, a big spike in 2008, and then a significant dip in 10 and 11, and now we're coming back up. What I like to see as the treasurer is having anywhere north of $175,000 that we can carry forward into the next year will really tide us over and really give us the continuity to be able to continue the work that GSA undertakes. Any questions on that before I turn it back to Peter? Better than a bunch of numbers, right? Few pretty pictures? All right. Financials, right after lunch. Great.
Thanks, Mark. Let's talk about what we have achieved. And before we do that, I'd like to remind, for those people who are unaware of it, that the board last year had a 5-year strategic planning session. So what is this organization going to be doing over the next 5 years? And the 4 pillars of that strategic plan for the next 5 years are on this screen. The first one, we're in the standards development business. That's what we do. So that's the first thing we will focus on. The next thing, of course, is the standards adoption. We want to make sure that whilst we produce these standards, the industry, of course, embraces them, but more importantly, that we're able to monitor the adoption. And that is not always that easy. The next point is a very important one. For any organization to sustain itself long term, you have to be relevant to the industry. You have to provide a value, and that's called industry relevance. We have online gaming, we have a lot of other initiatives that we'll be talking about. So that's a very major focus of the organization. The last thing is, we already touched on that, financial sustainability. We are a non-profit, we are a company, essentially. We just happen to have a non-profit status. How do we sustain ourselves? How do we make sure that we can do the work and be industry relevant? So these are intense discussions that are taking place in the board, and we'll touch on some of that, on some of these issues. So let's talk about what we have achieved this year. Standards adoption, transparency, and an oversight of the processes is very, very important. If you create a standard, it's about managing that standard. You cannot come out with a version every year or change it. So what we did is we put a process in place, and this is a very simple picture, but there is a link on our website that explains how we manage the standard in a 3-year cycle. It's what's also important that the the Architectural Oversight Committee, that is a group of the board members plus their technical advisors, they have input twice a year. And this is very important because technology changes. Technology changes fast. Maybe transport mechanisms that were used 5 or 10 years ago are no longer applicable. And it might be better to select a new way of transporting information. So to that effect, this process that has been developed and approved by the board is very transparent and available for anybody to read. The respective policies have been updated. The next thing we wanted to do with standards development is provide an overview to the industry. And to that effect, we have created an annual open forum. It is the annual forum that took place, I can't remember, June, where we inform the industry stakeholders what we have done and where we have a dialogue. And if there is adoption in various parts of the world, then we invite those people to speak to that, which we have done. Standards adoption. There is an important element here. Once people start implementing standards or technology, there is always challenges. Interoperability issues. The whole idea of a standard is to reduce interoperability challenges. So we call that lessons learned. Where are we going to get that information from? If an operator buys new systems and equipment and they connect it together, and guess what? It's supposed to work. Well, it doesn't always work, but we need that information. And to that effect, the CIC committee, the Certification Interoperability Committee, has created what we call a JIRA item. It's an open item that the committee will look at based on the information and feedback they get from the industry, actually our members. We will put on our website a link that allows people to provide feedback. This doesn't work, that doesn't work, etc. It's not as easy as it sounds to get that feedback, because most operators, they want to get the system up and running, and they have a great intense dialogue, and if it's up and running, then the dialogue disappears. We need to capture that dialogue. The next thing is an important thing, is the compliance verification tool. As you know, we commissioned Radical Blue to create a tool for G2S that allows vendors who implement the standards to use the tool to test against for compliance. And that tool is under development, and Radical Blue is present in the room, so you can always talk to Russ Verstine about the release dates. But we are targeting towards the end of this year to have the basic for the core classes of test cases developed. And the CIC committee is very intensely busy reviewing that and working with Radical Blue to get that tool done. That's a very important tool, because that tool is the metric, or is going to be the point against which you're going to validate both systems and games. The next thing is industry technology survey. Well, you'll see some slides about adoption of GSA standards, and we are trying to we tried to work with a company trying to get more metrics independent about the adoption of our standards in the industry globally. And again, it's not that easy to get, but it's one of our focus points for next year. So we will continue doing that. It's very important that we share to everybody in the industry who's adopted what version and where it is and what classes. So there needs to be a level of transparency that you need to understand in order to feel confident that these standards indeed are being adopted, and that you know exactly what you buy, because that will definitely reduce the interoperability challenges. Let's go to industry relevance. This is quite a big slide, or a big issue. We have created an online gaming committee. That was announced at January this year at the ICE show, or just before the, what they call it, the London show. The charter has been approved. We are now in the process of talking to online gaming companies about their participation and where we can provide value in that market segment. So that is definitely on the radar screen of GSA, and we'll continue doing that. We will present that in the EIG in Barcelona. We'll have some further dialogue, but I think so far there seems to be an appetite for improving that area. And it gets pretty technical if you're going to get into details, but let's keep at the high level here. The next thing is, and that's an important topic, the board spent a significant amount of time talking about industry and policy domains. There are three domains if you look at an industry. It's the policy domain, the governance, the regulators. You have the industry domain, those are the vendors and the operators. And then you got the consumer domain, the players. Collaboration in an industry, technology is growing so fast that collaboration between various domains is going to be more and more important. And this was as a result of regulators approaching GSA and said, we don't understand this online gaming business. We really like help. So how do we do that? I mean, at one side, they need to be at arm's length. On the other side, there needs to be a dialogue. I want to make it very clear that at this point in time, GSA is not developing policies. We are talking about information exchange. And one of the classic examples I always give is actually two that were identified by the organization 3 years ago in a report that we published on our website. The one is the traditional interface between the brick and mortar and online gaming systems. I think that's pretty easy to understand. The other one is a regulatory monitoring standard or reporting standard. This is messages that they extract from systems that allows them to do their job better, because at the end of the day, their responsibility is to protect the consumer. So to put it all in perspective, we made some changes to the organization to enable the creation of a group, the policy domain, on its own. In other words, it's a trusted environment where only regulators and government or policy domain people can participate in, not members. Not members. We don't want the industry domain people in the policy domain. So that is something we have created. We have a series of regulators, and they have not yet been announced because of timing issues, that stood up and are considered the founding regulators of this policy domain group. Right now, we call it internally the Regulatory Advisory Committee, the RAC. Whatever they come up with, that's what they will determine. So that's a very important direction. GSA could be seen as an umbrella. It's an umbrella that drives collaboration. If you look at our marketing message, it's all about collaboration between the industry. The next thing is going to be addressed by Kerry, so I'll leave it up to Kerry. That's the player user interface, which is a very important component. And Kerry is heading the Operators Advisory Committee, and he will give you details about that. Increased visibility of GSA, that's a nice word, but basically it's marketing. We need to and then establish relevant partnerships and awareness. Let's go first to let me see here. Okay. Obviously, we participate at trade shows, but we also try and pick the conferences that are relevant. Now that we have an online gaming committee, now that we're going to go in the policy domain, it's important for us to participate at WRB, EIB, whatever the conferences are that are most relevant. So that's what we'll do there. Establish relevant partnerships and awareness. We had discussions, and you can see it there, with the European Commission that was introduced, Adrian and myself, thanks to the RGA, was that right? They introduced it to the group called the Expert Group, which is lawyers in Brussels. They work for the European Commission trying to create standards framework, and it has to do with online gaming. So we had a dialogue with them. These people were unaware of GSA, so they welcomed GSA with open arms. And of course they wanted to have a European presence, who is actually representing GSA in Europe, and that's another discussion that we are having. The next thing we have is IAGR, Susan Hensel, who is the president of the International Association of Gaming Regulators, is very forthcoming, and we have a further dialogue at WRB to see how we can help each other. This is about supporting. This is not about stepping on somebody's toes. Again, it's about, the whole concept is about collaboration in the industry. The other one is NTGCR. Mark had the pleasure last week to go to the Cherokee Nations. We were invited by Jamie Hummingbird, and we are trying to see how we can get Native Americans represented in the organization, because they're an important part of our industry. So we have these dialogues, but these things take longer time than anticipated. And NIGA, we had a discussion briefly with Ernest Stevens last week, and we will continue that dialogue. The GSA compliance was identified, or will be identified, by the Gaming and Hospitality Research Center. For those who don't know, GNL, Gaming and Leisure, worked with Michael Day, and they contacted a company, Infotech, in Canada. And what they're planning to do is create scorecards of systems, games, or products in the gaming business. And on these scorecards, you will now see a simple label that says, it's like a traffic light: red, yellow, or green. Green would mean the product is certified. Yellow would mean it has GSA standards, but it's not certified. And red would mean it simply does not support GSA standards. It's the beginning of creating the visibility about where we are in the industry with the adoption of standards. But that is outside. That is done by GNL and by Infotech. Financial sustainability, I think I talked about that. There's some very good dialogue within the board. This is not an easy thing. There's a work group, and we are discussing various revenue models. What do we do with the current use, etc. So I can't tell too much about it because we need to complete the dialogue, and it is a complicated scenario. I can also tell you that intellectual property and copyright issues are being looked at, and we'll probably do an overhaul or an audit next year and see how we can improve ourselves. I'd like to give you a quick update of new members. I'm very happy to announce that GSA does continue to grow. I mean, it goes up and down, but you see a couple of new members: American Gaming Systems, Apollonia from France, I believe, China Lottery Online, they joined. DRGT Systems, I believe Belgium, Gaming Associates, Australia, Inspired Gaming Group, Nidex, Sankio, Ortiz Gaming, Ray, and U1 Gaming. So happy to see that these people joined the organization. Let's talk about adoption. And this is not specifically G2S, S2S, or any specific standard, but I was given some information by some of our board members, which I distilled down to a single slide. I mean, that's significant. 70 plus countries where GSA standards are being used in one way or the other. And that's a list of all the countries. So it shows you that after all these 15 years of hard work by all the volunteers and all our membership, that these standards are relevant. These standards is what the industry is looking for, and they are being adopted. Now, we need more metrics, I understand that, but we're trying to get to that point as part of next year's exercise. So what are we going to be doing next year, 2014? In the standards development arena, obviously we need to continue to communicate to everybody how we develop standards, and that process is again on our website. It's not perfect, but if we do get feedback back, the board will consider that and continue to improve that. The next thing is, and I'll leave that up to Ethan, I don't want to get into technology issues, is about transport. There was a discussion presented at the last Architectural Oversight Committee meeting to look at a more efficient way of transporting information. Then we did create the PUI committee. I mean, there's a couple of new committees that we created, the Player User Interface. It's a separate committee because it does deserve the focus from a group rather than being part of another committee. That's why the board decided let's put it in a separate committee. The OGC, the Online Gaming Committee, which I briefly touched on, and the RAC, or whatever the final name is going to be, the Regulatory Advisory, which basically represents the policy domain people. We did finalize roadmaps, and Ethan is the person on that. And if you go, by the way, on our website, you will see roadmaps and version maps. They're two different things, right? The version maps, of course, the history of the versions of the standards and explains the highlights. The roadmaps is the future looking forward. What is the standard going to look like? What are the functionalities? And that gets continually updated. So if you want to know what comes out in the next version, look on the website. So again, it's about creating transparency, right? We are a standard setting organization. And last thing, what I said to you before, perform a copyright and trademark overhaul. We just want to be sure that we protect the brand and we protect our standards. And for that, we will go through, with legal, we work on that and try and improve that. The second pillar of the strategic plan is standards adoption. Of course, we will continue with the annual conference. We will continue to monitor the CVT development, which is the tool that's very important to help with interoperability. We will also develop the GDS 1.2. GDS has a standard it's got many components. That toolkit is out of date. That toolkit will be updated. We'll continue with the industry technology survey. We have identified a group or a company that could potentially or will help us with doing a survey. It's not going to be perfect, and hopefully next year we can stand up here and report where we are with the adoption, so that gives you better visibility. It's about visibility and transparency. And the last thing is, and that's an important component, is create an adoption plan for the new releases of each standard. And really what it needs to do, we need an executive summary. I mean, why would you want to go, for example, if G2S 3.0 was on the roadmap, why would you want to go to 3.0? You need to know what is the real guts of this, what is the value that this standard produces versus the previous one, right? So it's an executive summary. You also need to know the availability schedules from the vendors, ideally. It would be nice to say, you know, you can expect it in 2 years or whatever the timing, so you have visibility as to when you can get the products. And then the industry educational programs. We have more and more demand to educate people around the world. And as you can see from that map, 70 plus countries, there is an appetite. People need to want to understand the technology, and Ethan is the guy who now lives on a plane more, so he can go and educate the people. So yes, if you pay for his fee, Ethan will go and educate, and he does that with in different parts of the world. The next thing, industry relevance. I think I've explained that. Online Gaming Committee, I talked about the Regulatory Advisory Committee. Continue to increase the visibility, and I don't have to read the points. Basically, we're going to make sure that we deal more with Native Americans, tribal. We also want to make sure we handpick the right conferences for us to be at, the right sessions. What else is on there? We want to make sure we provide more support outside North America. Europe, indeed, there's a lot of adoption taking place in Europe. We want to make sure GSA does something in Europe. We will be in Vienna on the 29th and the 30th of this year, October, right? And on the 29th, we're going to give an overview because the European members approached us and said, we'd like to get an update about GSA. So you will probably see a standing effort from GSA to be at least once a year in Europe to give an overview to our European members. In addition to that, on the 30th of October, we will organize a regulatory session, a regulatory meeting, and thanks to Susan Hensel, she's helping me try and get that together, as well as Mario and the European Union. So we're probably going to do a half a day or a one-day European update to talk about policy in the industry domain and see how we can play a role in supporting this industry moving forward. Again, we will continue to explore partnerships that are beneficial for the organization, and of course continue to promote GSA globally. There are parts in the world, especially in Asia, I was brought up, that GSA needs to make sure that that part is aware. That part of the world is aware of what we do. The last thing is financial sustainability. That discussion will simply continue. And now I'd like to invite Kerry, if you can provide an update.
Thanks, Peter. Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure on behalf of my Vice Chair, Brian McSemick from AGLC, and myself to give a quick overview of some of the things that the Operator Advisory Committee have been working on over the last year and some of the things we're hoping to achieve over the next short while. So a big part of the efforts that the OAC has been working on is around player user interface standardization. As you mentioned, Peter, in some of your opening comments, this is becoming we believe from an operator's perspective, a real interesting area of opportunity for operators to really have a much more involved relationship with their customer. We think that this is a technology that's ultimately going to have a big impact on the industry, and so there's been a big focus from the Operator Advisory Committee on this initiative. To that end, we spent a significant amount of time working on developing a number of requirements from an operator's perspective from the EGM, in other words, from the device side of the equation. So the good news was that as a result of some significant efforts, we were able to put forward a very comprehensive requirements document that we put forward to the board. Along with that document, we put forward a suggestion to the board that a player user interface committee be established that would allow some specific focus on that area. Continuing with the good news, the board agreed with the recommendations, and a player user interface committee has just been struck. I believe there was actually just a vote last week on the leadership for that group, and I believe it's just been announced, so that's great news that that's proceeding. In support of that committee, we were also asked to put forward a charter for the committee as well, so that's all been put through as well. Another big focus for the OAC this year, and this is largely as a result of the broader adoption of the standards starting to happen. We're starting to get a lot of feedback going on with respect to what people are learning as they go through the process. As Peter says, in theory, it's about interoperability, but really the heavy lifting occurs when people start to glue the various pieces together. So a lot of the meetings were really spent around getting specific feedback from a number of operators. We had some feedback from testing labs and manufacturers, and it was a really great opportunity for us to share information amongst the group and provide really those lessons learned, because at the end of the day, if we make mistakes and we learn things along the way, this is really the value of the membership, that we can feed that information back and hopefully make the process smoother on a go-forward basis. One thing we also did is we wanted to really have some more involvement from the technical committees in the meetings themselves. And we found that that's actually been very, very helpful. So we've had very strong representation from the other committees during our sessions, and it's really been great because we've been able to have a really solid dialogue from the operators back to the committees, and I think things don't get lost in translation when people sit in the same room together. Another thing that we've been continuing to focus on, obviously, as the gaming industry sort of heads down this path of regulated online gaming, we felt there was a great opportunity to start to bring some awareness about that business line. And so we invited a number of regulated operators in to talk a little bit about their business, what they had learned, and we're just using it as an opportunity to really build awareness of really this converged business model that's starting to form out there. The last thing that we're working on right now is, as Peter mentioned, there's some updates going on with respect to some of the transport protocols and that kind of stuff. And it was really important that the Operator Advisory Committee really have an opportunity to provide some feedback on some of the pain points that we have with the existing protocols today. So again, that could be fed back into some of the things that are being proposed around updates to the protocols. Excuse me. So what are we hoping to do in the future? Well, we want, just like the GSA itself, we want to really talk a little bit about and really focus and document on what are the things that we hope to achieve as a committee over the next little while. So that's going to be probably something we'll get going on probably in January of this year. As with all organizations, really at the end of the day, it's about adding value to the membership. And really we're going to be trying to focus methods to bring membership to the table, and so that they can see some value and really participating in the process. So one thing that we're going to do, and hopefully we can piggyback on some of the other surveys that are going on, we're going to hopefully do a survey to try and get a bit of a feel for what's happening out there for not only the folks that are participating in the GSA, but more specifically some of the organizations that maybe aren't actively participating in the GSA, because at the end of the day, if we can find out if there's some business need that perhaps we're not providing, there's an opportunity there for hopefully to fill that void. Continuing with PUI standardization, the next thing that we're working on is, as I mentioned, the first focus for the committee was to really focus on standardization or requirements as it related to the EGM themselves. Well, there's a whole bunch of information and requirements that we're going to have to obviously get on the table and document, put forward with respect to the host or the backside of the equation, because with the vision that some of the operators have with respect to the player user interfaces, this world where we can put content from all sorts of different sources, and oftentimes the vision is easy to achieve, but it's trying to figure out how to do that. So that's kind of where we are going to be focusing on next. Another area, again, that we're going to continue to focus on is e-gaming. As I mentioned, there's starting to be adopted. There's more regulated offerings out there, and we're going to continue to look for ways to get feedback from the operator community as to what they would like to see embodied in some of the various protocols and standards that are being put forward. And with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Ethan.
All
everybody's going, here comes the bits and bytes guy. So I'm going to try to keep this at a fairly high level and not get down into the weeds too much. I'm going to try to give you just a quick update on what's going on in the committees, and once again, kind of looking forward to what they'll be focusing on. First, the S2S committee. I think we finally achieved a big milestone in S2S this year, having finished the alignment with G2S. We've been at this, I think, for at least 3 years, going through all the different classes, making sure we have alignment so things are going on in S2S to support G2S operations. Are actually aligned and it's all transparent what's supposed to be going on. So we've completed that. We're also looking at creating new classes for managing mystery jackpots and also progressive sign updates. These are a couple of gaps that were identified by one of our members, and we're trying to fill those. Getting into some new areas, and we're going to see this in G2S also. Now that the protocols have been out, like S2S I think has been out there for almost 10 years, we're beginning to find that some of the technologies that we originally relied on or built the protocols on are getting a little stale. People have new preferences, new technologies have come along. One of the things we're looking at in the S2S committee is moving away from our traditional XML model to traditional asynchronous communications that we do, and moving to a more standard REST and JSON-based approach to doing some of the interfaces that are in S2S. Not all of them, but where appropriate, we're thinking about introducing some new technologies there. The other thing that we're working on, the very last one, is sort of closing the loop on GAT. GAT is game authentication. It starts off with machines reporting checksums for their software. One of the gaps we identified there was there was no way to verify, other than going to a slip of paper that came from a testing lab, whether the signatures you're getting back are correct. So we're looking at putting in place an automated method for verifying the signatures coming back from the machines. This is actually a great example of some place where the current structure in S2S, which is designed for high volume, high velocity type of transactions, we could do things a lot simpler if we moved to a different type of message delivery model, something like REST and JSON. So actually this is our poster child for looking at REST and JSON. The G2S committee sort of been continuing on their merry way, doing what they do best, which is taking feedback from implementers, answering questions, getting corrections and clarifications into the protocol, working on extensions. There's a short list of them there. There's actually, the long list is about 25 odd items, extensions that have come out since 2.1 came out. I think the most critical thing, though, that the G2S committee is doing right now is sort of, we've got the protocol version 1 out there, we've got version 2 out there, we've had lots of implementations done. People have learned a lot about the protocols, what works well, what doesn't work well, what might not be necessary. And so we're taking a critical look at the protocol, looking forward to the next version, and saying, where can we make the protocol easier to implement, where can we make it easier to test, and where can we make it easier to operate. And so I think this is probably a good milestone for the G2S protocol to get to the point where we're saying, okay, we've got all this done, we've got it out there in the field, let's close the loop, let's see what we can do better. Okay, how can we improve it, can get that sort of circular loop going, the continuous process improvement. So the G2S committee is actively looking at that right now. Transport, it's all about acronyms. Unfortunately, the people who support those acronyms and put them out there in the field, they change what they mean and how they operate. And so one of the things we're dealing in transport right now is what we need to do in our protocols to adapt to changes that have happened in other protocols. Things like TLS and PKI, which set up the security infrastructure for communications, those have changed. We need to adapt to those. The other thing we're looking at, and Peter mentioned this, and it's already gone through the board for approval, is to actually look at introducing a new transport based on WebSockets as an alternative to SOAP. SOAP was all the rage 10 years ago. WebSockets are all the rage today. We actually, thanks to actually the guys at IGT who did a lot of work on this, they found that we can make some significant efficiency improvements on the wire by going to WebSockets, and also actually make the protocols easier to operate too. So that's going to be an exciting change that will hopefully be able to have more information available on that in the next few months as we refine exactly what we're going to do with it. On the GDS side, Peter mentioned that really the most critical thing in GDS right now is getting an update to the toolkits for the 1.2 version, so that people have a toolkit to use and test and verify that their implementations of GDS 1.2 are working correctly. The GDS committee is also on a continuous basis getting questions from the field from implementers and getting answers back to them. Moving on to the new committees, the PUI committee, which is just formed, Harry talked about it, Peter talked about it. I'll sort of bring it down a level into what we're really looking at trying to standardize. I've tried to break it down into 4 key areas of standardization for the player-user interface. One of the things you'll notice in this, which is really key to the GSA's approach to the PUI, is we don't want to start talking about implementations and how you're implementing the PUI in machines, okay? But there are 4 critical things that we need for interoperability. The first one is there has to be a standard way to control the player-user interface, okay? So if we have 4 different ways it's been implemented, we need one way to control it, okay? We don't want 4 different systems having to control it. We want one system that can control all the different types of implementations. We're looking at G2S as the mechanism for doing that. The other 3 get into the content. If you're an operator and you're developing content, or a content developing company, you don't want to have to develop different content for those 4 different implementations. You want to develop one piece of content and be able to run it across those implementations. So there are 3 places that we need standardization to make that happen. One is with communications directly to the EGM. We have this little protocol called EMDI, which is a great thing because it allows content on the machine to receive events that are taking place inside the machine. So very simply, it can react to something happening on the machine, close itself, and get out of the way because the game's being played. So that's one critical thing, that we need a standard for the content so everyone can program that into that interface. So regardless of whose platform you put that content on, you're going to get those events in a standard manner. The second thing is securing the communications coming out of the content to the back-end servers. If you're just putting advertising up in the player-user interface, security is probably not a big issue. But if you're taking money off the EGM to buy lottery tickets, you're going to start getting concerned about security of how that's taking place and making sure those messages are protected. The content needs a standard way of doing that security. We don't want 4 different implementations approaching the security of that communications in a different manner, because that would affect how you have to write your content. So we're looking at standardizing how that security is going to take place. And then the last place of standardization, once again, if you're writing content to run in HTML, you're writing it to run in Flash, you have to know that each of the different implementations out there are going to support how you've written your content, the languages that you've used to write your content. So it's important to get agreement and standardization around what formats are going to be supported in those PUI windows. Okay? And that really comes down to things like HTML5 and Flash, whatever particular version of Flash is going to be agreed upon. But we have to get agreement there. And this really, once we can get this playing field set for the PUI, people can implement it however they want, get it working on their machines however they want, but for the people who are developing the content and operating the PUI windows, they can have standard interfaces for that. Moving on to the online gaming, which is just in its infancy right now, but getting started. The committee has identified at a high level work items that need to be taken a look at. The first is a common game interface. In online gaming, typically you have a big platform. It's got all the it stores the money, it's got the interfaces to geolocation, it's got the interfaces to a brick and mortar system. That platform's in place there. Into that platform, you need to be able to integrate game servers, integrate the actual games. So we're looking at how we could standardize that interface to make it possible for the platforms to be written to that standard, the game servers to be written to that platform, and hopefully helps speed time to market and help make integration of those easier. Peter touched upon central monitoring for online gaming. That's a critical point also. Currently, it seems like every regulatory body out there who's getting into online gaming is doing their own specifications on how you have to communicate We're going to try to make an effort to put some standardization behind that. The last two are on interfaces. We're also have talked about external interfaces to things like geolocation systems, payment processors, trying to get some standardization around that, and also the interfaces to brick and mortar systems. Actually, the S2S committee a couple of years ago actually worked on that and had actually gone through things like player tracking and make sure that you can currently report that type of stuff. But there are other opportunities in the brick and mortar interfaces that need to be addressed. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to our keynote speakers. Gerhard Kuhl from the Federal Computing Center in Austria, as I call it, BRZ is a lot easier, and Martin Ziegler from the Ministry of Finance. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your invitation. My name is Martin Ziegler and my colleague Gerhard Köhler. We would like to talk to you about our new gambling control system. I am proud to be the product manager of this system. In 2010, the Austrian government passed new gambling laws, and therefore we had to develop a new gambling control system. I would like to introduce our main goals of this project. They are the following 3 points. Number 1 is protection of players from addiction by enforcing regulations. These include minimum and maximum payout ratios, ensuring randomness of wins, limits on pay-ins and payouts, minimum time limits of games, and mandatory cool-down phases in between games. Number 2, new measures for greater transparency and more efficient tax collection. And last but not least, number 3, good cooperation between the legal side, the finance office, the financial police, the Austrian federal provinces, and also the concessionaires. Since in such a complex project, it is important to work together. These goals were our guidelines in the development of our new system. And now I would like to hand you over to Mr. Köhler.
Thank you. Thanks, Martin. Well, when I got off the plane in the US, a lady beside me asked me what I'm doing in the US, and I said, yeah, I'm talking about gambling regulation in Las Vegas. So she asked me, who the hell would be interested in regulation of gambling in Las Vegas? So I wondered, and I think it's really what Martin just said in the end, it's cooperation. And what Peter said before as well, it's collaboration. And for cooperation, we need communication. We need a common language, and that's what we need standards for. So yeah, we have these 3 goals, and I want to talk about how we tried to reach these goals, and we built there on 3 pillars. That is, first of all, regulation, like all legal requirements for the machines, most important for you. All EGMs in Austria and all VLTs in Austria will have to be connected to a central server at the Federal Computing Center, or BRZ. Then licensing, second of all. For connecting these EGMs, we need to know where they are. We need to register them. We need to register the EGMs, the locations, and so on. And third of all, what we do all this for in the end is control. And I'll go into detail, especially into regulation, a little bit into licensing, and then into control. Now, first of all, regulation. All our legal stuff bases on several regulation items. That is, first of all Europeans will know the European Union regulation, then also the Austrian overall regulation, the gambling law of 2010. And 2012 we extended these for casino venues. Also, we have provincial regulations. Austria is very tiny, but still we have for every province a separate regulation that does make things a bit more complicated, as you can imagine. And then what is very important, we have a legal ordinance that tells how EGMs and VLTs have to be built, and I'll go into detail about that in a second. Now we have two types of gaming machines in Austria. It's first of all what we call Glücksspielautomaten, what I will refer to as EGMs in the rest of this presentation. They're under provincial licenses or under federal casino licenses. And then we have video lottery terminals that are under federal lottery license. Now the only difference is that the random number generation is for VLTs is outside of the machines. That's really the only difference, technically spoken. We have four types of venues. And our single machine venues with up to 3 EGMs. I think there is no concession so far of this type. Then we have EGM saloons and VLT outlets with up to 50 VLTs, and there's casinos with no limits. We designed all these systems for up to 15,000 EGMs. So as you can see, we have and you will see, we have a quite comprehensive legal regulation. What makes it even more important, and it's very challenging for the machine manufacturers and concessionaires to implement these regulations, as some guys here will know. That's what it makes it even more important to fight against illegal gambling, and there was a special force created for that in Austria, which is the financial police. My focus today will be the legal gambling, though. About regulation, we didn't that's about the legal ordinance. As you might guess, we didn't really invent these things ourselves. We looked around in the industry. We did a market screening first. We looked what's existing in the world. We talked to industry experts. Klaus Achmüller was one of our experts. He is probably not here. But in the end, after some while, when we selected G2S, it was also Ethan Tower who did a very good job in helping us establishing all this. And yeah, in the legal ordinance, you have a whole list what's contained in there. It's about hardware and software requirements and so on. Most important, it says that G2S message protocol and the P2P transport protocol have to be used for communication with the central server. Now we have some more regulation about, for example, inside how the inside of the EGMs have to look like. For example, a logic box with sensors, which is kind of standard already in the industry. And we have some specialties which are not so much common in the industry, but makes it more challenging for manufacturers implementing this. We have, for example, the requirement of a USB connection for a cryptographic hardware token, which I will show you in a bit, because we kind of need to identify the machines. As you might guess, there's not only one machine in Austria. In location, we have several machines. For example, here 9 that wouldn't ever exist. As I said before, it's minimum 10, but it's just a symbol. Well, if we have 9 machines in the location, we need to identify those. And how do we do this? First of all, we have to identify the EGM type. We do that by a software signature. And we have a hardware identification number. It's just a static number. And then we need to identify the EGM itself. And we do that with a traditional manufacturer badge, but also with a QR code that has all essential information on it or in it, and we can read it with mobile devices. So what we also have is seals. We can see one seal here that says Glücksspielaufsicht with the Ministry of Finance logo on it. And then we also have 2 more seals, one on the hardware token, which we can see here, and then one more seal between the hardware token and the EGM. So if someone tears out the hardware token, we can see it because the seal is broken. Now these hardware tokens, they're handed out by the Ministry of Finance. And don't ask me details about the cryptography things. Ethan knows much more about that stuff than I do. But they contain a RSA 2048-bit private key, and this key is the keys for the EGMs are generated, stored, and used on the tokens themselves. So this is kind of a special thing that we established in Austria. And it's a hardware topic also, because you need to put that USB token somewhere inside the logic box, obviously. Now, a location is connected to the central node of a concessionaire, and this central node of the concessionaire is then connected to the Federal Computing Center. And as you might guess again, we don't only have one location, but we have several locations, and in the end we'll have locations in all Austria. This is Austria, by the way. In the whole country. Right now, the first concessionaire established locations in Lower Austria, which is not what's up mountain, as Ethan was guessing before. It's just a province, like very close to Vienna, and those are the first machines connected. Now, how do we do all this? And that's really not hard to guess. We do this by, as I said before, with the G2S protocol. We have a requirement of several classes to be implemented. Not all the G2S protocol needs to be implemented, but those classes listed here. For us, it was very important to have the audit meters class. So we were very glad that this was implemented, or this was included in version 2.1 of the G2S protocol. Now, for security reasons, we have all communication encrypted, and also all communication is stored in an archive, which is unalterable, so we can always see what happened in the communication between machines and the central system. Now, another thing that you can guess is that we didn't implement the G2S protocol ourselves, because the Ministry of Finance and the Federal Computing Center has other expertise. So we did a tender and we tried to find someone implementing something that we called the G2S protocol engine. And I can tell you it was not easy. But finally we got Comtrade contracted, who implemented this G2S protocol engine, what you can see up there, which is the front end to all EGMs and VLTs. And behind that we have our own systems to manage the data that we get via the G2S protocol engine. Maybe in the end, Ivan La, who is here from Comtrade, can also tell us something about challenges implementing the system, or if you have any technical question, he can answer those. We have here a screenshot of some messages that we can see in the administrational tool there. Well, why did we choose G2S? Why did we go with G2S after looking at the whole market? And it was three things, because we really believe in standards. It's one core strategy of Federal Computing Center in Austria, to go with standards as far as it's possible, as far as legal requirements allow that. Then also because we wanted a modern system, we wanted a modern basis with full functionality for control. Since we did a new system, we didn't want to go with old protocols, and because it's defined by the industry. We were in Italy and we looked at the Italian system. They wanted to offer us to use their system as well, but in the end they said if G2S would have existed when they established their system, they would have used G2S as well. Now that gave you a quick overview on the regulation in Austria, and I want to go quickly through licensing. That's just a quick overview. Like, first of all, there's a word and a legal notification, and then we need to get all the EGMs and all the information on EGMs and locations into the system. Therefore, we developed a tool that was developed by the Federal Computing System Center together with the Ministry of Finance. And we have all licenses, all locations, all EGMs and seals and tokens, and everything is administered in there. And it's a tool where all parties work in together. It's not like we put the data in. The concessionaires themselves can put in data for locations and EGMs, and then the provinces and the Ministry of Finance work with this data. can see a quick screenshot here. Unfortunately, it's in German, but some of you know some German, especially Ethan got better and better with his German in the last 2 years. Yeah, that's an example how a new location is entered, and you can see on the left that there's the system is quite comprehensive, and it has lots of functionality. But what is more important for us is, and the last thing I want to talk about is control, what we use all this for. Now, we have 3 elements. That's first of all that EGMs are tested by third-party test labs. You're quite used to that already in the industry. And then we have overall monitoring. We can monitor all events in the system. And also we have event-based warnings, like in some circumstances we get warnings if some situation occurs that is of interest. And then we have on-site inspection as a third element. And I want to talk about monitoring and on-site inspection. Regarding monitoring, as I said, we have the automated event monitoring and event-based warnings. I brought another screenshot there. And what we did is, it's unfortunately German again, but I'll explain it to you. We gave the events priorities. We said, like, the logic box door open is more important than some other events, so we gave them high, low, and medium priority. And then we put a filter on all events that can occur in the whole system, and all of the potentially 15,000 EGMs connected. And then we can select the events that are of interest for us. We can select the concessionaire, we can select the location, and the EGM, and the time frame, and so on. So we can really filter down to what we want to see. You can see a result list down there. Now, we don't have anyone sitting there the whole day just watching events going on. That would be kind of not such an intelligent job. That's why we'll have some agents and stuff that in certain situations, someone gets an email and gets the information, hey, look at that case a little bit closer. I listed some examples for this here. Like one example is an EGM shouldn't lose connection for more than 4 hours in a row. So after 4 hours of losing connection, someone gets an info and can look at that closer. Or if the logic box door was opened, we can check the software inside and see if they're still installed, what's supposed to be installed. And well, then if something is not as we expected, in the next stage we can contact someone gets an automated email, as for example the province responsible, and can contact the concessionaire. Yeah, what we plan to do, that looks really cool, I think, and Ethan really liked that as well, is we plan to do an on-site support, mobile support. That's not implemented yet. We're still looking at it if that helps, and we might implement mobile support. We see some screenshots here. That would be like the on-site inspector goes out and selects a location, and he can select in the location. He has a checklist on what he should check on the location. That's also things that are not relevant in the communication. It's like if there are some illegal commercials or whatever in the location. And then he can scan the QR code with this mobile device. He gets a checklist what to control on this EGM. If the seal is okay, and if all the regulation is okay, there's a checklist about that. And then he can also do test games, for example. He can document what he put into the machine and what test games he did and what the counters should be and what they really are. Now that's something that's what you can do with the control system that I showed you before. It might be easier to have that done with a mobile solution, but we're still thinking if we will really implement that. But that would be a good help for on-site inspectors. Now, you got an overview on regulation, on the licensing part and control. I want to talk in the end a little bit about the challenges that we were and are facing. First of all, for us, for the Ministry of Finance and Federal Computing Center, the biggest challenge is to find someone implementing this G2S protocol for us, which finally was done by Comtrade, and also in such a small time frame. It was only 1.5 years, or 1 year in the end, time to implement everything. And also, it was quite, I think so, at least what I think, it was a good challenge also for the manufacturers, because we know we have a quite challenging regulation there, but I think the results are quite really good. In the beginning we were really surprised how far we did almost a plug and play, but then as you know, the devil lies in detail. Now when we got live, and you can see the third point here, when you do live real-time operation with a full amount of machines, it's always quite different from just trying with one machine or with 2 or 3 machines. Well, that were the biggest challenges. Operation started on the 1st of August in Austria, after coping with some challenges also with the G2S communication, where we got good support. Again, we got 799 machines connected. Until the end of 2014, we reckon with 5,000 machines, and all in all it would be up to 15,000 machines. Well, so far it's like 3 manufacturers having already implemented or working on solutions for the Austrian market. We would definitely be interested in more EGMs available with fulfilling our regulations. But in the end, I really want to thank GSA for supporting us in establishing this system, especially Ethan, because he did a really good support in the last 2 or 3 years. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank Gerhard and Martin for making the trip and accepting our invitation to be the keynote. I think it's very exciting to see what you can do with standards. I mean, that application I was completely unaware of. It's amazing. And yes, the industry is working very hard in embracing these standards, but it's because of people like yourself, Austrian governments, as well as some other people like the Canadians who understands the benefits of open standards and therefore pull open standards into the market. So thank you for accepting the invitation. I'd like to conclude the annual session with some recognition. First of all the committee chairs, and I was told that there is a new chair announced for the PUI, right? Or
John Taylor.
John Taylor. Oh, John. Can't get away, right? Yeah. So all these chair people really do a phenomenal job trying to herding cats, so to speak, and without the leadership in the committees, we would not be able to do what we do. In addition, I also like to thank a team that I have. I'm very, very fortunate in my life to work with excellent people. So thank you very much. Lisa, Michelle, Gina, Ethan, great job. Well, this is our 15th year, and what we decided to do is to recognize the people who actually created the standards. The amount of work and effort that went into this is most people do not comprehend. And as you can see, 1,783 plus people since the inception have contributed to the creation of standards. There are 2 lists on both sides. If your name is not on that list, and it's also on our website, if your name is not on that list, you can log into the website, put your name into that, we'll validate that, and we'll make sure you're on that list. So just think about the effort that went into the creation. This morning I was told that there was a country trying to create also a standard for gaming. I asked myself, good luck. It's a big effort. So thank you for all those volunteer people, 15 years of hard work. Then there's another company I'd like to recognize, and that's simply because this is the second company I believe that has a product certified. They went through GSA certification. I know, for those who know, GSA certification was created 5-6 years ago. There's a company, I think, a year or 2 years ago, and GLI tested this company, Intralot, and they've been approved, I think, on G2S and transport, correct? So those are the 2 certificates. So for those who would like to see your certificate, there you go, that's how it looks like. So you know that they correctly implemented those specific classes, and there's a lot of detail behind that, but those are the 2 certificates. And for that, I'd like to say thank you very much to everybody for attending, and hope to see you next year. Thank you.